Welcome, everyone. You're listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. The Last Dinosaur is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading that charge. Today, I'm joined by Sven Brooks, CEO of ScanReach, a guy not content with the status quo. We dive into how his team is pushing wireless tech beyond the edge of what most people think is possible at sea. Sure, we're going to touch on the usual aspects of sensors and machineries and performance, but the real story here is how they're using wearables to track crew in real time across the ship. In an emergency, captains can see exactly who's where. No guesswork and no delays. Even more powerful, this same tech is opening doors where we haven't wanted to talk about before, like using data to help combat sexual harassment on board. It's transparency, it's accountability, and it's long overdue. Sven, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. What a pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because I'd love to talk about your involvement and really your journey in this space, because I'd love to hear about your background and kind of how you've gotten to ScanReach and how you really developed the mission at what you're doing.
Well, that's a long-winded journey, which began about 25 years ago. So I started out in the maritime technology sector, working across NavComs, specifically integrated bridge systems, satellite services, digital integration for both naval and commercial vessels. And during that time, I had port calls in London, in Rotterdam, Hong Kong, Hamburg, and now in Bergen. So over time, I got a little bit more involved in maritime digitalization and IoT, specifically because, we noticed back then that the bridge has so many data points, so much valuable information for others and other digital applications to offer. That would make sense to create a type of back of bridge platform. Now, back in the mid 2000s, that was a pretty fresh take on things. Now it's, I would argue, the norm with more, let's say, IoT mature shipping companies. But that journey eventually led me to ScanReach. And today, as you pointed out, I serve as the CEO of ScanReach, which is a maritime tech company based in Bergen, Norway, where I work with a fantastic team, where we're pushing the boundaries on a daily basis of what's possible on board, especially in the fields of safety-related technologies and wireless technologies.
It's really interesting. Let's talk about a little bit about kind of your initial focus, which has been on the performance and really talking about one of the biggest problems, I think, in the industry is you have a lot of different data points and a lot of different machinery with data points, and making that come together and getting that to other people, like you said. Talk about kind of that evolution before we get into some of the newer things that you're working on.
Yeah, I don't want to get too techie, but when you look at the vessel, it's not as uniform as other modes of transportation. I mean, that's why UPS or FedEx truck or some similar companies are available, where it's so much easier to collect data. A vessel is massive. It's a massive investment. There's so many companies and so many smaller ecosystems in place, whether that's the area around cargo monitoring, environmental monitoring, navigation, energy, automation, propulsion. All of these are like mini ecosystems and arenas where different players dominate the market. Now, if you want to have or address ship optimization, vessel performance optimization in its entirety, you really need to collect data from all these different areas. And that's challenging because you have different players, different technologies, and also specifically in the retrofit market, different vintages of equipment out there. So data acquisition, data aggregation, data consolidation is still today a massive challenge in the industry. And that's what I found quite appealing when I joined ScanReach, that we have a technology that can remedy some of these challenges.
Because you're looking to do that over basically an IoT type platform, I guess, or is that really the best way to describe the main, without getting too techie, the main kind of crux of where you're trying to deliver that value?
Yeah, we've created a wireless mesh network that works extremely well in steel environments. It's been purpose-built for a steel environment, purpose-built for ships. And so we've built a complete ecosystem around it that allows us to collect data from machinery below deck, from sensors on the bridge, and deliver it to any endpoint that's desired, either on board of the ship or onshore via cloud computing.
And I think that's one of the most fascinating things, because we had a guest on here who said something to the effect that I'm curious to hear your feeling on this, that 90% of the data that's gathered on the ship, that's actually available on the ship, doesn't leave the ship and it stays on it. And again, I don't think it's for malicious reasons. It's for some of the reasons that you talk about, like, you have different OEMs, you have different requirements, you maybe have some firewalls within platforms, and I'm just kind of guessing here, but I imagine all these barriers here to get that 90% of that data off and into the hands of whether it's the operators or charterers, a head owner, technical managers, so on.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword. So on one hand, I would argue, how critical is the data if it's only collected for the office on shore? Mission critical data needs to be used by the crew on board in any incident, during any event, and during normal operations. But there is certainly the case that we now have abilities to empower the shore and connect the shore much closer to the crew on board for various reasons, to optimize performance, to optimize safety, to optimize operations. And to my mind, and I believe you had Chris Watson on one of your recent podcasts, connectivity plays a massive role here. The cost of connectivity has gone down with better networks than ever before, and that allows us to move more data between ship and shore. But the crux is, you got to collect that data somehow. So now the connectivity is available, but the sensor is still way below deck emitting data on a regular basis. So how we're going to get it from down there into the cloud or to the people that need to use the data on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big challenge. I know I feel also that's big opportunity. When you start to talk to folks ashore and then the seafarers, what's their general reaction about just the idea of trying to connect everything, whether it's with your product or other thing? Is this something that a lot of people feel is long overdue? Or do people feel that this is another burden, especially from the seafarers' point of view, this is another burden that we have to try to figure this out and manipulate the system or utilize any system to get the value that the office is trying to get from us? What's some of the feedback that you're experiencing, both from the shoreside folks and then if you visit the ship, the ship folks?
I think it comes down to the application that we're talking about. And so when we look at fuel monitoring, for instance, and performance monitoring, I know that topic has been beaten to death so many times. I'm sure we're going to hear more about it. Decarbonization is a challenge. We need to optimize the industry. I'm very clear about fuel monitoring, and fuel optimization is key to that, no doubt. But I think how are you going to start to address that topic? I'm so surprised because I'm from the bridge market. I'm still so surprised that a simple fuel gauge isn't mandatory in the industry. Why? So I step into a Toyota Prius or whatever, right? Other brands are available, but I have access to a fuel gauge. Why don't I have access to a fuel gauge on a vessel that burns so much fuel, right? It's very odd. And it's such a simple piece of technology. It's something where we set out at ScanReach. We can make this data available in an instance. We can make it available to the officer on watch. We will empower the officer on watch to a certain extent. There's even an element of gamification in all of this. To say, I want to beat my last, 6 hours or 24 hours or whatever. And it works. It's been a while ago, but I believe it was Bernard Schulte and Signal Group. They released a press release around just exposing the mariner to a fuel gauge or to the live fuel consumption will actually benefit operations because there's a fuel saving up to 5%, because you will change your behavior once you're exposed to the data. That's where it starts. That's where collecting data becomes very engaging, as long as you engage the people around it before you even send it on shore. Of course, when you send it then on shore, you can add more people to it, smarter tools to it, create a feedback loop. There are more benefits to it, but it starts out with the officer on watch or, with the captain on the bridge or whoever And then it's I think it's beneficial for all parties.
It's funny you say that about gamification. I have a 17-year-old. He drives, and he'll sometimes put the car that we have on, it's just a Toyota RAV4. He'll put it on like an eco drive. He's like, Dad, I got like, he gamifying it in his head, right? Like, oh, I went to school today and I got like 32 miles. Like, I mean, the school's like 7 kilometers from the house. But the whole idea, and I think that you're right, because he's 17, so not yet in the workforce, but not too far from, let's say, some of the junior officers that would be on board. Some of these junior officers, let's say in their early 20s, so 5-7 years older than he is. It's the same mindset, right? They're going to want to see the same thing of like, I beat the last officer of the watch by a half a ton or whatever it is. And that's something that's interesting, because even though I stood watch on ships years and years ago, I never really thought about that part of gamification. And it also brings up, I had Christina from Bound for Blue. I always mess up the name of that company. I apologize. But the Wind Assist Propulsion Company, right? And she had a comment that said that when they put the wind assist propulsion up, they basically put the sails up, and they're the rotor sails. They could see, at least in the engine room, the consumption go down, or the turns needed to make the same speed go down, right? And they said it's like having a Ferrari on water, which was a great comment. But the point is like, I think what she was saying was, and maybe I misunderstood it, is that they'd have to call down to the engine room and get their feedback, and then watch the speed go up, and then bring the engine down. So it wasn't like an automatic watching the consumption slow. It's a little bit of watching a few different gauges. So what you're kind of saying is, give it to me in one gauge that I could see that deploying this type of, whether it's an asset or other type of weather routing, actually makes sense.
Absolutely. Your first stop is always the crew. And as long as the crew is involved, I think the asset is always going to be looked after in a much better fashion. And it makes the whole digital journey so much easier, regardless whether we're talking about fuel optimization or cargo monitoring or Connect POB, people on board.
Yeah, that's the next thing I want to bring up. Talk a little bit about what you're doing with wearables. I'm not exposed to this. This is, I guess, maybe I am. The closest thing I think we all are is we have some sort of Fitbit or fitness tracker, and, it says that I've taken my steps and things like that. Talk a little bit about what this technology is, what it's trying to do, and then some of the feedback I'd like to pick your brain about that you get from the crew and from the office.
Yeah, it's a technology that's widely used, specifically in the wind and energy sector, to ensure that you monitor how many people are on board at any given point in time, especially if we have walk to work, gangways. If we have operations that include offshore assets, we need to monitor, we need to muster on a regular basis, we need to understand who's on board. And that's why this makes quite an impact in that sector. The way we solve it is that crew members wear a wearable. The network picks up the crew members, so you can monitor the location of each individual. So before we're starting to get overly concerned, we're not in the business of surveillance. We're in the business.
So you're looking about, if you say that it has 10 people on board, we have 10 people on board and they're all accounted for. That's what you're looking at this point.
Exactly. So our systems are generally designed with privacy and transparency at its core. So the technology is fully GDPR compliant.
Okay.
Really topic,
yep.
Of course. And we don't track people in private spaces. Cabins, for instance, are strictly off limits, and no data is used outside of its defined safety or operational purposes.
Right. So is there a way to kind of branch out on this? And my background is tankers, although this does apply to, other confined space, confined entry evolutions. This seems to be tailor-made for that. I'm not trying to, I always try to, just for everybody, let everybody know, one of the things I talk about with my guests before we go on is we want to talk about what's going on in the industry. We talk about the product, but not an infomercial. So I'm not trying to make an infomercial for you, Sven, but this seems to be a next evolution here, because I've been in confined space, cleaning out tanks, cleaning out bunker tanks. You have even issues with the dry bulk market, and all ships, regardless of what they are, you may have to do a bunker tank entry or, engine room entry where something is wrong. Are you looking at those as a next step, as having mini monitors on O2 levels, on toxicity, things like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's part of what we delivering. So we deliver a full ecosystem. It's not just the mesh network itself, and the nodes can obviously report when they're picking up any activity. So if you mount a node near a crawl space and somebody's near the crawl space, it can trigger an alert. It can trigger a traffic light going off. So it depends on what the client would like to see and how the client would like to address that particular challenge. And of course, within that network, we can mount multiple sensors, usually Bluetooth low energy BLE sensors, which is really at the heart of IoT. So the moment when we look at what happened in IoT at land was unlocked when wireless technology became available anywhere. So, and then with that, the rollout of Bluetooth low energy sensors happened. Those are simple data coins, data attacks, and they can tell you what temperature, what humidity is around you. We can have gas detectors, motion sensors, proximity sensors. There's a whole array of affordable industrial IoT sensors available in other industries, which we can now take to the marine industry. And the data that they are collecting is enhancing all the common use cases around onboard maintenance and maintenance schedule monitoring, preventative maintenance, but also fuel optimization, fuel monitoring, and so on. Vibration is another topic. So all these small sensors can now be mounted in that mesh network on top of looking at where crew members are at any given time on board of the vessel, so that during emergencies, we can ensure that crew members can be found. So the wearable, for instance, has a little button. So a distress alarm can be added to it, can be alerted, so help can be on its way.
What's the feedback that you get both ashore and afloat about deploying specifically these personal sensors as well as the entire node? Is it generally met positively, or do you still get pushback from, let's say, folks that don't necessarily embrace that?
So there are certain markets that are more GDPR focused than others. And so when we talk to clients, we actually don't spend as much time on the installation itself, because the installation can be done by the crew. Those nodes can be mounted very quickly by the crew themselves. But our installation team spends time with the client, training the crew members and advising the shipping company how to roll out and how to communicate the technology. Because at the end of the day, it's like wearing a hard hat or steel toe boots or whatever. It's protective gear, but it needs to be communicated. Because if it's just being handed out as a piece of technology, it's not going to do any good to anyone. So it goes hand in hand with an entire rollout process, for which we have a professional team in-house to ensure that the solution is implemented respectfully and efficiently.
Talk a little bit about maybe a good success or a good win that you've had, because I'm really curious to see if something that you've installed and then within a few weeks or months there was an incident that, let's say, the impact was lessened. Anything that you could share on that?
Yeah, I mean, shipping companies don't like to talk a lot about incidents, but
or a near miss. Yeah, I know it's always.
We had events where people fell downstairs, needed immediate help. I mean, we got to think about there are less and less people on board of ships, and the ship is a large area with lots of machinery and equipment around. So accidents still happen despite all the policies and processes in place.
Absolutely.
But, we had crew members falling down the stairs. They pushed a distress button, help arrived. We had incidents where, this was a particularly odd one, where a steward locked himself up on deck in a reefer container. And due to the airflow, he couldn't push the door back open. And he used the distress alarm. Some friends arrived, helped him out. So that was another near miss. We also experienced, although the system isn't built for this, but we had instances, thank God we have more and more women in the industry, but that also means that we have women working isolated on their own on board of ships. And just as in land-based industries and land-based businesses, unfortunately, harassment can take place at sea as well. And our technology has been used to report that as well. although it's never been designed for that. But it's
I was going to explore that a little bit. Like, no, that has to be something. I mean, one of the goals of this podcast is to kind of get the more positive word out about the industry. It's a great place, whether it's a company like yours, whether it's to be a seafarer. But one of the looming issues that I think over time, and I'm a guy, so I really can't speak. You have to have women speak about it. I don't want to mansplain thing. It does seem like there's a lot of these great steps, and that seems to be a positive unintended consequence, is that if something is happening, you could alert other people about the about the issue, whether it's sexual harassment or an assault, even amongst crew members, that you could, definitely squash it before it gets out of hand.
Absolutely. And it just comes down back to its core. It makes the workplace safer, more desirable. It's probably also easier to attract better crew, to be honest, because it shows that the shipping company looks after their crews. And the standard on board of specifically the wind farm vessels is already very high. But there are always things you can improve. Well, we're starting to communicate that into other parts of the industry, specifically tankers. I think there's some low-hanging fruit there as well to improve safety there. I mean, it's a very safety-conscious part of our industry already.
If you just look at the hurdles that tankers have to go through versus dry bulk in terms of just fixing on a day-to-day basis, and the amount of vetting and the amount of scrutiny that the ships get, it is different. And dry bulk is moving in that direction for a lot of reasons, but certainly an earlier pioneer are the tanker side of the business, always very safety conscious. And, and I think that companies just don't want that stain. One of the things that we talk about on this podcast is the imminent crew shortage, and crews are becoming a premium. We're going to be dropping an episode soon with, I had a gentleman on from Ardmore, and they work with a, technical manager, crewing manager, and they have their own set of officers that come on because they want to train them in their way and then keep them in the Ardmore system. And, to do that, to retain any talent, and to say, well, we want to focus on making sure we have a diverse workforce ashore and afloat. Could be an interesting way, or one of the interesting ways to assure just a higher level of safety.
Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't forget a ship. And I keep saying that to most people I talk about IoT at sea. A ship is a hotel. It's a transportation medium. It's a warehouse. It's a restaurant. It's a power plant. And it's sometimes even a factory. And as a community, as the maritime industry, we can learn so much from these adjacent industries who all have made vast use of IoT or wireless technologies, devices, applications. So what we're seeing here is wireless technology is the door opener to IoT in the maritime space. And it's an invitation to so many IoT mature companies out there to take a closer look at shipping, whether it's in the aspect of keeping mariners safe, or whether it is to optimize your galley, or it's to optimize your power consumption on board. And there's so much that can be done. It's interesting. You can take so much inspiration from what you see on land-based IoT, and you kind of go like, why aren't we doing this on board of our ships?
But it's also going to foster, and maybe this is a positive or a negative, it depends on how you look at it, more collaboration between ship and shore, right? Because realistically, it's in everybody's interest to reduce consumption. Let's just going back to that, or it's everybody's interest to have a safe workplace for everybody, because then that attracts more talent. You have more talent. You have a deeper pool. You can maybe buy more ships and not have to worry about crewing, having an extra 40 something people between two crews or 1.5 crews, however you want to slice and dice it. But talk about kind of how that collaboration is part of the mindset of getting all of this connectivity and this IoT, and then the connectivity off the ship too, which is evolving pretty much as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you've kind of touched upon collaboration. I think this is where the first generation of digitization in shipping struggled with. To my mind, we're entering a new phase in digitization. The first phase was really focused on creating these large-scale ecosystems, lack of a better term. So larger corporates try to collaborate with more and more companies trying to create, let's say, the iTunes of the seas, forcing shipping companies and clients into their ecosystem that they've built along with a dozen or 24 of partners. But I think that also, A, it came at a cost. B, it forced clients to look at a limited set of options. And I think that phase didn't deliver the desired results. We're now entering a phase in digitization where systems become a lot more agnostic, manufacturer agnostic, but also platform agnostic. So this vendor lock is being removed. And it was about to happen because it happens literally in every digital industry. So it's quite nice to see that development, and everybody in the industry is starting, especially in the digital side of things, is starting to find their role. And we've defined our role, for instance, by not going all the way down to AI, not going all the way down to, with the exception of our Connect POB or the people tracking offering, because it includes a lot of technology. We didn't go down all the way of end-to-end solutions. We're a piece of middleware that collects data from any sensor and delivers it to the desired endpoint. And that allows us to work with so many manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, software companies, sensor providers, even class societies, to ensure that the data is being used in the industry.
The interesting thing, I have a question for you because you bring up where we are. And I love this question. Okay, so I maybe at one point say in a baseball game, but that's only a certain proportion of the world. So we're going to go with European football, as we call here in the U.S. soccer. We'll call it football, or the beautiful game in Europe. So where do you think we are? And looking at that, we have two halves. We have a pregame, two halves, halftime, and we have postgame. Where do you think we are in the digitalization of our industry? What part of the game are we? And I've had some interesting answers, so I'm curious to hear what you think. Based on kind of this evolution of, at first it was be all to end all to everybody, and kind of this, you want to deliver a platform idea, and everybody, everybody's got to have the platform with some partners, and now it's more agnostic. And I'm seeing that as well. My old role, I had an interesting, somebody approached me. I was completely shocked. They said, we've built our own platform internally the way we like it. We used AI. We just want an API for some of your data. We'll continue, and it was a relatively small company that came out of left field. So we're seeing more and more of this kind of just give me the data, in a way that we like it, maybe a little more agnostic. But putting it into parlance of soccer / football, depending on where you're coming from, where do you think we are?
Halftime.
Okay.
It's I think the first half didn't quite go as planned.
Okay.
But we have a pretty good plan for the second half to win the game. This whole drive around decarbonization, I think, helps digitalization efforts tremendously because it brought the worlds of below deck equipment, specifically engine propulsion, power, and navigation closer together. And you see that in the industry, whether that's around acquisitions, whether that's around, VDRs and shaft power limiter. It's the worlds, they're not colliding, they're merging. And that's because it's for the greater good. Unfortunately, I think as, trade is what it is these days. Chris, I'm not going to get too political, but you got to have a little bit of room to maneuver, and every change in direction will cost. I believe that digital technology, unlike other technologies, delivers a relatively quick return investment, because the investment compared to other parts in shipping that are really hardware-based, a software-based investment is considerably lower. It's equipment in the marine space just expensive.
Yeah, great comment. Great comment. The gentleman that runs Signal Maritime was at a conference. This was probably about 10 years ago when they first started. No, not quite 10 years ago. 2018, 2019, we first started. And he was asked about starting a company. And he said, I could start a platform for $25 million, which is a lot of money. That's like Series A, Series B. But, this is a Greek ship owner. He said, I could start for $25 million, go out and hire data analysts, hire all these people, build the best platform in the world. It's still cheaper than buying a new Aframax MR, whatever he said at the time. So right there, he said, and I could unleash a lot of positive benefits from that, and not even getting into the whole emissions type thing, but just the routing and the trading, and that's where he was focusing on. So I go back to that comment by him. It was quite interesting from a very lofty view, but certainly something from a practical point of view is not untrue.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, we're always going to have the challenge in shipping that it's, unlike other industries, it's not as homogenous as, let's say, the airline business, right? It's or airplane business. It's not going to be as well connected and fairly low cost as the land-based transportation, road transportation in particular. Shipping will always be highly fragmented. It will always be expensive. It will always sit between different worlds, different parts of the world. We have different shipbuilders in different parts of the world with an entire industry, a rat's tail of providers of equipment and service companies behind it. So it's always going to be a highly fragmented industry. So if people are starting to talk about, well, we need more standardization, that's going to be extremely tough. It's because we can't fix it. We're not going to live in a world where we're going to have a Boeing and an Airbus. Again, other airplanes are available, but it's highly fragmented.
I mean, forget about what's going right now with the politics, but let's just take the whole idea of tramp versus liner. I mean, that in and of itself, they have their pluses and minuses. I mean, certainly going back to the emissions discussion, tramps can, harder to say, oh, we're going to have an MR with ammonia on board. You know how many ports an MR tanker can go to? Now, you may be able to say that with a VLCC, because if you look at a VLCC, you have a defined basically number of ports or offshore platforms, and you can maneuver that a little bit easier. But you get to a bulk size Handymax that, is doing all sorts of different things to all sorts of parts of the world. Well, that becomes, more of a challenge. Speaking of challenges, and one of the things we kind of briefly touched on is getting and retaining new talent. Let's say you're looking to hire somebody on the technology side, and they're looking at maybe going to someplace cool, like a startup, not maritime. What do you tell them about, like, hey, come and join us on the, as I've been joking around lately, come and join us on the dark side. We have cookies, and it's the maritime industry. What do you tell people?
Well, we tell people really our story about what we do at ScanReach and how we change different parts of the industry. And it comes back to the fragmentation. And that's what makes it so exciting. One of the reasons I left the Navcoms business in particular is I enjoyed promoting gyro compasses. But, that thing pointed north 50 years ago. It points north today, and it will point north, hopefully, 50 years from now.
We'll see.
But there's only so much a gyro will ever do. And what we're doing here is we are working so closely with clients to understand their challenges, whether it's the well-being of the cargo and simple things like we have to send a guy out around the vessel to collect temperature and humidity information. And we do this with pen and paper. And well, guess what? With a few $100 in your hands, you can actually automate that whole thing. And nobody's even aware of it. So the moment you create that awareness, people understand how easy it becomes to change your operations, optimize it. And it's just a small example, but this happens in every niche, whether that's in the bulker trade, whether that's in the PCTC trade, whether that's in wind. And that's what makes it so exciting. So we tell our narratives, we tell our stories, and we attract people from the IT industry. So basically half of our team are young software developers, and we attract seniors from the maritime industry who understand the trade. And when these worlds merge, it gets really, really exciting. I'm not going to say this is going smooth all the time.
I think that's the most important thing, because you don't want, any company to have only people, let's say technologists or what have you, right? Like I'm a professional product manager and I can manage any product. Like, that's good. Like, okay, but you should probably have a bunch of people who, at least depending on the size of the team, understand maritime, have been in it, have traded ships, have worked on ships, have dealt with people who worked on, all those sort of different things, because I think it makes the product better. It makes, the all important understanding your client, which is a huge part of it, better and more, and at the lead and at the forefront. As we wrap up, I'd love to ask this question. I don't know how much you get out and travel and get on an airplane or on your nightstand, but what are you reading these days? Anything interesting?
So on a personal level, I really enjoy reading 50s, 60s sci-fi. I know it sounds strange, but there's something about the pre-lunar landing sci-fi that is super appealing. That's kind of the age when everybody thought anything is possible and people lived under domes on planets far away. I just love to read that. It's a time when technology mesmerized people. Now, I'm not a native speaker, but there's something about that term mesmerizing. And when you're mesmerized by technology, it's just different. It feels as if, it unlocks a completely new world and you marvel at what's possible. And so that's what I enjoy privately. A friend of mine just recommended a website to me last week, and that's called ash2027.com. And it offers a narrative exploration of how AI might evolve over the coming years. And it's authored by a team of experts, including former OpenAI researchers, and it has input from over 100 specialists in AI, and its governance is super interesting because obviously these days you always have to touch, even in this podcast, Chris, up on AI.
Of course.
So
yeah,
that just as a closing remark from my side here, that's an interesting read because we always need to look into how we utilize that technology moving forward. And so do we at ScanReach, but we're not putting that at the forefront. We use this in the background when it comes to data management.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a big part of it, and I'm sure we could keep going on. Sven, thank you for coming on. This was totally enlightening. I love kind of the transformation of your company, and as always, keeping the seafarers, as part of the mission of safety and running the ship efficiently. So thank you for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate it.
Chris, many thanks for the invitation. You're doing a stellar job for the industry. Many thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you around.
Thanks.